building the board GM relationship in the first 6 months. Thank you for coming. Welcome to my workshop. So I think I'm going to start by finding out who you are, and then I'll tell you who I am. So how many of you are in stage 2A? Anybody? Nobody. Nobody. Stage 2B? Okay. All right. How about stage 3? Okay. I know, you kind of go back and forth sometimes. Who here is engaged in a hiring process right now or about to start a GM hiring process? Okay. This is especially for you. All right, and one more question and then I'll start talking. How many of you have read the GM transition guide from FCI? Okay, just a couple of hands. Okay. I definitely recommend reading it. So my name is Siobain Mitchell. It doesn't sound like it's spelled. It's Siobain, trust me. And my home co-op is Siobain Co-op Market. We're Metro West of Boston. And we are opening this year, which is very exciting. So we actually hired our general manager last January. So January of 2021. We had successfully negotiated for a site and found a great GM, hired them, and then the site fell through. Tragic. And we kept our GM. We said, we have an awesome GM. We're not gonna let them go. And then they helped us as we went back to the drawing board and figured out another site and then had to successfully negotiate for that site. And that is the site where our store is opening. So, by the time we open, we will have had our GM for almost 2 years. So that's fun in your pro forma. But we got to have this kind of really amazing period of time where we got to do this transition in kind of a less frantic way. And it was a very successful transition for us. So I'm going to talk about GM transitions, right? And then, so the other thing, you can come in if you want to. You don't have to. The other thing is I'm actually co-authoring with JQ Hanna chapter 3 of that GM transition guide. So what you're getting today from me is really a preview of the material that is ultimately going to become chapter 3. And then the guide will be actually complete, and it'll be published for real. Okay, so what are we doing today? I said how to prepare for your GM arrival, what to expect during the first 6 months, how to minimize challenges, and how to set yourselves and your GM up for success. That's kind of bold. I think I might have been caffeinated when I wrote this. But let's see what we can get through, okay? So, there's a saying. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. Same thing for doing your policies. If you haven't started working on your policy register, the best time to do it was probably a year ago, and the second best time is when you get home from Wisconsin, okay? Did anybody, I wanted to ask one more question. Did anybody go to JQ and Rich? Okay, yeah, that was great. Yeah. That was great. And I did speak to them briefly just to make sure that we weren't going to be covering the exact same stuff. But I thought they did a great job. Okay, so for those of you that have read the GM Transition Guide, this should look familiar, right? And conceptually, this is the end goal, right? You're a working board, and when you get to the other side, you're going to be just a governing board, right? And that's all you're going to be doing is just governance, right? But how do we get there? How are we going to get there, right? And it's this transition is what you want to actively plan for and prepare for and engage in, right? You might be in this transition phase for a year, right? Depending on how close you are to opening when your GM shows up. So it's a little scary, right? Maybe it's a lot scary. You're transitioning a huge amount of responsibility and power to your general manager, and you are doing it in a relatively short amount of time, okay? It is going to be a lot of work getting ready for this process and engaging in this process. It is going to take like just this really significant burst of time and energy from the board, but once your GM is up to speed, it all becomes worth it, right? Because things actually will start to come off your plate, and that's the goal, right? So really, there really can be no higher priority, right, than making sure that your one employee, who's going to be holding so much of your co-op's success in their hands, right, gets off to the right start. Okay. All right, so it will be bumpy, but there are things that you can do that will minimize the chaos. Okay, so delegation decisions, right? Going to JQ and Rich's awesome workshop, doing your delegation of authority spreadsheets, getting all of those decisions made ahead of time. And you just really need to be crystal clear on what's being fully delegated, what's being in this strongly partnered place, right? But who has the final authority, the final say, okay? And what you're keeping, right? So for example, a lot of startups now are keeping that outreach piece, right? And they're maintaining that through store opening and beyond. Maybe not in its entirety. There will be pieces that transition. There will be staff members in the store who will hold various pieces of that, right? And if you're a small co-op, it will be spread out over multiple employees. You're not going to be able to afford to have a full-time outreach staff person. It just doesn't work, right? But so you just have to be very clear ahead of time what you're transitioning. Okay. So no gray areas. No. 30-day plan, right? So your 30-day plan is your onboarding plan. And as with any new employee, it's really critical to set the tone, right? If you are really disorganized when they first come in, that's sending them a message, right? But not a good message, right? So make sure that you've put in the preparation to make the first week especially productive and informative for your general manager. You want them to feel they are being given the foundation that they need to meet your expectations as a board and make your co-op successful going forward, right? And you want them to feel welcome, right? There's going to be a really strong temptation to bring your GM into meetings right away. There's going to be a store design meeting tomorrow at 1. You're going to come. Don't do that. Resist the urge, okay? 1 or 2 more weeks will not make a difference, all right? And it will make a difference to how you're able to build this relationship with your general manager, okay? So, you know, the 30-day plan, you know, that first week is really like an orientation week, right? So you need to be prepared to spend a lot of time with your general manager, and you need to tell them about all the everything, right? Your current IT systems, do you use Nation Builder or MailChimp? Do you have a Facebook page? You know, who hosts your email? How do you store files? Yeah, do you have a question?
The first question is, like, is this interactive with a question
Yes, I'm sorry.
or a hold question?
Thank you
Go
so
back
much.
down.
Housekeeping. Oh yeah, please ask questions, right? And then I may answer it right then. I may say, hold that thought, we're gonna get to that in a minute. Or I may say, that's out the box and we'll come back to it at the end if there's time. Yes?
Okay. You keep referring to they, when you're talking to them, you should talk to them, you should. Who is the you?
The you is the board.
So the board as a whole is the only time that's communicating?
We're gonna get to that in a minute. Okay, so week one. Current IT systems, how do you organize and store your files, right? Your current bookkeeping, financial, and owner record systems. Your GM is not gonna assume oversight of those systems yet, right? But the initial meeting is to explain them all, how they interact, and how they will need to transition prior to opening. You'll be doing stuff like an overview of your committees, your volunteers, your current consultants, project manager. You want to also be talking about policy governance in that first week, right? You want to be having those conversations. And then you need to be talking about your core values and your mission, especially if you have a GM that does not have current co-op experience. They are not going to have experience working for an organization that is values driven in the way that food co-ops are, right? So you really want to spend time talking about how you've been talking about your project for all these years. Why did your owners join, right? So that needs to be a key component of week one as well, okay? And then, week two is gonna be, and don't worry, I'm not reading every word on this. These are notes from the workbook, I'm just using them. Week two, you can get into your market study, your business plan, your pro forma. Where are you at with your capital stack? Do you have your equipment loan yet? Are you doing a capital campaign? Are you done with it? Are you done with phase one and now you have to do phase two, right? So that's kind of week two type activities, okay? Now week three activities, that's when you start having your GMs really start interacting with people. So then only in week three are you really gonna have them do these kind of longer meetings with, if it's a store design, like whatever it is, with your committees, with your committee chairs. If you have a current employee, you want to just be careful about that because there may be feelings. There may be some uncertainty that current employee might be feeling. So you just want to be kind of thinking about those things, but you want to be expanding the circle, right? To include meetings maybe with your lenders, your landlord, right? And then the GM and the board chair, hopefully, would start working on your transition timeline. And then, let's see, week four, your GM will meet your owners. Not any sooner than that, right? Again, there's gonna be this urge to throw your GM out there, throw them up on Facebook, hold a meeting. Don't do it. Really let them get up to speed, right? Because the owners are going to be asking that general manager a lot of questions, and you want that GM to be prepared to answer those questions and to engage with your owners in that way, right? So you really want to, if at all possible, give them the time to go through this orientation process so that they're ready to start communicating with your owners and start being kind of in this public-facing position. Okay, so that's one thing. GM development plan. Okay, this is going to come out of your interview process, your hiring process, right? And you don't know who you're going to find to to be your general manager. And maybe they don't have experience with policy governance. Maybe you and your GM get to learn policy governance at the same time. And what an excellent opportunity that is to start it off right and to just develop good habits right from the get-go, right? Your general manager might need training in understanding the pro forma or preparing financial statements, right? It really depends on their work experiences, right? And are they requesting training in something else? If they're resisting professional development, that is a red flag, right? So you want to make sure you can train. If somebody is willing to learn, you can train them to do things that they don't yet know how to do, right? But it's significantly harder if you have somebody who's resistant to that and who doesn't want to engage in that kind of a process, okay? Are they coming in from out of state? Do they need to get oriented to your state's employment laws, right? I do highly recommend all of you should offer your GM the Zingerman's training, the Zing train, I think they call it, with a Z. It's amazing. It's for leadership in food spaces, and it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. Highly recommend it.
What's it called again?
Zingerman, Z like zebra. I guess INGER and then man, M-A-N. If you Googled that, it would probably come up, even if I didn't spell it exactly. It's getting close enough. Google takes you that last little bit, right?
It's a restaurant like food purveyor in Michigan, like Ann Arbor.
And they do these wonderful, wonderful training sessions called the Zing Train. Really fantastic. And then, just a reminder, you should also commit to professional development of yours, right, on your own as well. Okay, where you need it. Okay, so that's the GM development plan, the transition timeline, right? We do not recommend, as JK was saying, we do not recommend just throwing everything at the GM. Here's some passwords, here's some keys. Bye, have fun. Nor do we recommend waiting to give them authority, right? Both things are actually bad, right? So the transition of power needs to be intentionally and methodically moved through, okay? So the GM can grow their knowledge and details of your project. Then they will be ready to hold and wield each piece of authority as you hand it to them. That's the goal, right? Okay? You're also going to want a reporting plan, because with delegation comes reporting. And we're going to, I have a whole slide on this, so we're going to be talking about this in just a few minutes. Okay. Let's make things really fun, okay? You don't know how long it's going to take to find a general manager. How far along in your process are you going to be? If you don't have a GM, if you have a project manager that might be doing the work, somebody is going to have to start making some decisions about the store that the GM is going to run, right, before the GM should. Conceivably. It really depends on your project and how it goes. But you don't know how long it's going to take. So by the time they start, will you already have an architect? Will your store design be completely done? Will you have picked a contractor already? Right? So you'll need to be clear. You'll need to be clear about what decisions have already been made with regards to the store, with the capital project, okay? And where and to what extent you will let that general manager make changes. Keep in mind though, this is their domain. Like, this is where they are competent and professionally qualified, right? Is in store operations. That's why you're hiring them. They may not be a good project manager, right? But you're hiring them presumably because they know how to run a store. And if they're looking at the store design, and if they're coming to you and they have concerns, you really need to listen to that. And you really need to think about how you can respond to that. And you need to be working together in that place, right? So are they gonna come in and say, I don't like the site? Oh, well, that ship has sailed. I mean, we're not gonna bail on a site that we've already spent all this money on, just because it's not perfect. But to the extent possible, I would just encourage you to just really be open to that feedback, because this is where they really do have that knowledge and that skill base that we don't, not really, right? Okay. So your transition might look something like this, might look like something else. These are your crayons, this is your transition. And the goal with a lot of these things, just like with the delegation of authority, don't just talk to your general manager, talk with your general manager. Get their opinion on this. Do it together with them, right? You really need their buy-in, right, to this whole process. You can pretty much take an area and, oh, jeez, I stuck on my phone, sorry. And break it down. Like bookkeeping might go first, and then payroll and tax filings, and then the checkbook. Doesn't have to go all at once, right? I guess I just would, caution you not to break everything down so far that you really start to get into being like micromanagement. Like, that's not a good place to go. So if it's helpful to break things down into its component pieces, then do it. And if it's not helpful, then don't. But at some point, construction decision-making and store design decision-making will go to that general manager, right? Okay. Let's talk about this. Okay, this is for you, Jerry. The big smush. This is like the most awkward part of the transition, okay? And so getting your brains wrapped around it ahead of time is just going to be immensely helpful, okay? So somebody, typically it's the board chair, is going to be spending a lot of time with the GM in the first month or two, but they won't be the only one, right? So individual directors will be working with the general manager. Whoever heads your finance committee might be the one that's going through the business plan and the pro forma. You might have somebody on the board who's not the chair, but that person would be the best person to help orient your GM to your community and what organizations are in your community, who are the movers and shakers, who are those people where you have already done kind of this networking and you have these kind of established relationships with. That's really good for your GM to know. Please don't forget to include that in the information that you give to them, right? So it's hugely important to recognize that those individual directors, right, they are working with the GM, but they're not speaking to the GM, okay? No individual director has any authority over the GM, and if you had policies, the policies would say that. So only the board can talk to the general manager, and the board needs to do that. It needs to speak with one voice, okay? So you have to really start to think about the difference between working with or speaking with versus actually speaking to as a one voice, unified voice from the board. Okay. Now, your GM is going to need people from the board, directors, to continue doing work even after they've started and even after authority starts transferring over to that general manager on a schedule, right? Because no matter how amazing they are still only one person, right? So, and they won't have staff until like that last month, right? It's really just gonna be just that general manager for the majority of the time. And then right before opening, all the other people get hired in, okay? So, what's important to recognize though, is that when individual directors are doing work in an area that has been delegated to the general manager, they're not really doing it as a director. They're really doing it as a volunteer, right? And they're reporting to the general manager, right? So, for example, at Aspet, I still do some of the monthly QuickBooks stuff, right? But when I do it, I don't report to the board that I've done it. I email my GM. I email Sam. And I say, Sam, I did the owner's equity account, reconciliation for the month. Because I'm reporting to Sam, because Sam has the authority over that, and I'm just a volunteer. I'm not doing it as a member of the board that is their boss. And Sam could replace me if they wanted to. If they don't like how I'm doing it, they could find somebody else, right? So this is like the really awkward piece. And if you can kind of get clarity around this, it can be really, really helpful and just make that transition go a lot more smoothly, okay?
Hey, Siobain. You have
Yeah.
a question there, and then I had a comment as well.
Yeah, okay, go first.
My comment is just, I don't know how much more I could say amen, sister, to what you just said about all this. Being someone who's on the board, who is on the GM search team that hired our general manager, this has been one of the biggest struggles to get all of our board members collectively through. And there's constant reminders saying, yes, you can help our GM with that, and you are wearing your volunteer hat when you do that.
Yeah.
You could talk to them, but we should probably have somebody else do that because you're wanting to talk to them with a director hat, and that needs to be our board president, who is the person that communicates from the board to our GM. So like
Exactly.
having people understand which hat they're wearing and calling it out, or calling in probably is the better term for that particular action, it is so critical, and it's been such a stumbling block for all of us at different moments in time. Even though I'm, the person that has kind of tried to wrap my head around this as much as possible and help the board through it, there are times that I'm like, shoot, I'm a volunteer right now, I'm a volunteer, step back, step back. I have to remind myself of that. So
Yeah.
having lived through
Yeah.
this moment right now, amen, sister.
The big smush. Amen. Yes.
I think she kind of answered my question. My question was, who do you find has the biggest challenge during this transition? I'm assuming it would be the board members realizing that they're no longer in charge. But does the GM then have a hard time kind of stepping up, or, where do you see the biggest thing we should watch for?
It can, yeah. It can really negatively impact that healthy, trusting relationship that you're trying to build with them. And especially at the very beginning, it doesn't matter how amazing they are, at the very beginning, they're not going to be very assertive with the board because they're still figuring it all out. They're still kind of getting the lay of the land. And you can actually kind of screw it up. Now the good news is you can go back and fix it. You can go back and have this conversation with your GM. And you could say, yeah, we kind of did the smush and it didn't go well. We want to do better from now on, right? And you do that by affirming where they have authority. That's a great way to start any conversation, right? We recognize that you have the decision-making authority in this situation. And now we're all gonna talk about it together, right?
I think that's what helped us a little bit, is saying, okay, did we transition this information to our GM? Okay, then we're just volunteers. They own it. And we've had to kind of have that conversation. And it's not that our GM hasn't been, sometimes confused, like we're coming at them. And so we've had to also add language in to say, I'm coming to you as a volunteer
Right.
on the such and such committee
Right.
to talk about X, Y, Z. So please don't think this is something coming from the board.
And exactly, I mean, part of making this successful is being very clear on what is being transferred and when is it being transferred. Just being as clear as possible so that everybody has the same shared understanding, and everybody understands what the expectations are, and reporting expectations, which we'll get to in a minute. Okay. All right, and actually I think we do that next even. So we're gonna dig into transition reports, right? So the end goal, right, is to have your GM report to you, and then for you to monitor individual reports on every single one of the executive limitation and ends policies in your policy register, right? That is the end goal. It is going to be a long time before you get there, okay? And trying to go from bringing your GM and just trying to go straight into this annual calendar that we're all supposed to create. We're all supposed to have one, right? None of us are going to. I don't, right? Aspet doesn't, and we're going to do C1 in January and D5 in March. You can't go from hiring into that policy calendar, and it's not going to work. And it will in fact set the board and the GM and the co-op itself up for failure, okay? Because you're not going to get what you need, and they're going to be overwhelmed, okay? So, for the board to monitor the GM through the transition phase, we need a different kind of reporting from standard policy reporting, okay? So the reporting needs to be a clear and effective window for the board to see into the GM's work so that the board can assess both the GM's abilities to take over areas of operations and how well the vision and business plans given to the GM are being executed on behalf of the co-op's owners, right? It also needs to be a tool that helps the GM get a clear picture of their essential work rather than just creating busy work, okay? Well-crafted transitional reporting expectations will actually serve the GM, okay? It will help them bring into focus what they most need to keep an eye on during the often chaotic and fast-moving build-out phase of the store, okay? Yes?
Is this basically kind of a scaled-down governance requirement?
Gosh, I didn't pay him. I just went on to say that. I didn't. So the steps that the board will take when assessing a transitional report are the same steps that it will take when reviewing a policy report, okay? So you are using policy governance. If you are getting reports and you are monitoring the reports and you are using those reports to supervise your GM and then provide feedback to your GM, that is using policy governance, right? The only difference is that it's a transition report versus a policy report, okay? Now, the transition phase gives the board and the GM needed practice steps toward using reports and monitoring as a major piece of their regular work and communication with one another, okay? By the end of this period, by the end of this transition period, you and your GM will have developed the skills necessary to transition into a truly like team-based reporting board GM relationship, right? So that's partly, let me just say one super press thing. That's partly why it is so important to not wait to transition authority to them. Because you need to do it, because you need to start monitoring reports. You're learning how to do this at the same time, right? You're both building up these muscles together, and you're building these skills together. You have to start, don't leave it till right before the store opens, okay? Yes?
And maybe this is getting a little too much into the weeds, but I was just wondering in terms of how you do this, are they giving a written report to the board, and then are they meeting with the board like in person monthly, or how is that typically working for you guys?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
That's what I'm gonna talk about next.
Oh, okay.
I didn't pay her either, I swear. Okay. So, we do recommend having all of these transitional reports, and we'll talk about when we bring them in, okay? The first one that you wanna start with is this GM activity report. It's not meant to be a burden, right? Ideally, it would take the GM 30 minutes to write, and it shouldn't take you more than 15 minutes to read. It should not take their entire Friday. If it's taking their entire Friday, something's wrong. Either you are asking for something crazy, or they're not organized, and that's a sign, right? That's a sign, okay? So, it's the first one to start, and in many ways, it is the most important, right? So in the first month, it is gonna help you track their progress through that 30-day plan, okay? And after that initial month, it will keep the board informed of what work the GM is doing, okay? So it would include potentially areas where you have transitioned authority to that GM, okay? But it would include, really the goal is for it to include places where your GM is spending their time, right? So if they're doing training, that would be included in an activity report. Are they redoing their ServSafe? Are they doing board work, right? And then, are they doing meet and greets with the community? Are they out there, having lunch with, the person who runs the food bank? Like what's going on, right? Okay. And then, when it is a place where you've transitioned authority, I just want to differentiate. So let's have an example of like financial activities, okay? You've delegated finances to your general manager, okay? And they're gonna give you financial reports. We're gonna talk about that next. What they're gonna do though, in that activity report, is they're just gonna report to you, that they're taking care of things like account reconciliation, payroll, and tax payments, right? So it's not a financial report. It's not giving you information that you have to look at and have an opinion on. They're just affirming to you that they are taking care of the things that need to be taken care of on a weekly or monthly basis, right? So I just want to kind of make that. Yes.
So in the affirming that they're doing it, how do we get a sense that they actually I can affirm I'm doing something, but that don't mean that they can study.
Yeah. So no, I get it. Oh, I know, I get it. I took care of everything last week. Yeah. So with the finance stuff, it's trust and verify. Okay. So when the co-op is open, you're going to get an actual audit, right? And that would be in your policies. Again, if you have policies, then policies would talk about that. And whether that's every year or every other year, right? And with a full audit, you know, the CPA is writing this report and submitting it to the board. Okay, in this early phase, we're not gonna do that. But what we can do is you can ask your GM to have the accountant write a letter, right? So not a formal audit, not nearly as expensive as a formal audit, right? But you just want that accountant to just come in, and whether that's quarterly, I think we get ours quarterly, because we do a quarterly B1, but I'll get to that in a minute too. So with our quarterly B1, it's just a statement from the accountant saying that everything has been done according to GAAP standards, basically, right? So yes, trust and verify, right? So the other thing that's cool about activity reports is you will see work that's being done in a particular area, maybe even before the results of that work are presented to the board in like a topic-specific report, right? So for example, you might see in an activity report that your GM has begun going through your list of local farmers and producers. Hopefully you've got a list. Hopefully it's not on 5 different pieces of paper. But they're gonna start going through it, right? And that'll show up in an activity report. And then later on, you'll get a values report, right? And the values report is gonna be the thing that details your GM's progress on their plan to prioritize local food on your shelves, right? So, you know, this report would be submitted to the board every week, and you don't have to formally approve it. You just acknowledge that you received it, and or note that you did not. And then so what we typically do, so we were getting these weekly in the beginning for almost the first year. We were getting these weekly. And then directors can always ask questions. And in fact, it's your job to ask questions, right? It's your job to know what's going on, okay? But the way to do that when you have a general manager and you're on a board is to email the general manager and the whole rest of the board, right? So now it's one email that the entire board can see, that there's a question for the general manager, and now the general manager can answer that question, okay? And maybe somebody else had the same question, right? Okay, so this report, the activity report, eventually goes away. The only thing that survives really is what you would call like an FYI, and that would just be that could be a random sentence. We submitted the plans for the building permits. That's an FYI, right? Now, is the FYI the place to say, we submitted the plans for the building permits, and oh, by the way, we're pushing opening date by 7 months?
Yeah.
Okay. So financial reporting. And what time is it? How are we doing for time?
It's 1:45.
1:45, and how long are we here?
It's
An hour and 15.
1 to
2:15.
2:15, so it's 1:45, okay. All right. I will not spend a huge amount of time then on these reports, but, you know, the financial reporting, I'll spend a little bit of time here because of how important it is, okay? You know, during construction and store fit out, like your co-op is gonna be spending so much money. Really fast, right? So having adequate financial controls and timely, accurate reports to the board, it's just critical, right? So that you can fulfill your fiduciary responsibility. And then financial reporting starts immediately upon handing over the checkbook. There's no lag. There's like, okay, either the board is paying the bills or the GM is paying the bills. And if the GM is paying the bills, guess what shows up in our inbox, right? This financial report. Okay, and financial reports, you would be reviewing them at a business meeting, a board business meeting. Okay, so that you'd have the GM actually presenting financials to you. You'd get them in advance, but then the GM would be walking through those financials with you at your business meeting, and then you get to ask all kinds of questions. Right. Okay? So you want to have, oh, yes, Carol.
Do you still maintain 2 signatures on the checking account?
You do not?
Okay, I just, yeah.
So what we have at Siobain, that's a great question, thank you. So what we have at Siobain is we have expenditures below a certain dollar amount, right? They just happen. If there's a single check or a group of checks that are going to come through that exceed $10,000, I get a notification from Sam. And any checks of $25,000 or over requires that a second signature on the check itself. Okay? But Sam, our general manager, is fully empowered to pay our bills and to be in charge of our books, right? With good reporting, right? And then we get to spend all this time together, you know, just having this experience of reviewing these financial reports and doing it over and over and over again, and just getting really good at it, right? That's the goal. That's my hope for you, is that you will also have a transition that is spread out, and that gives you that same opportunity to just kind of build these skills and develop really good habits. So the financial reporting, you know, you really should be asking for those 3 statements: the balance sheet, the statement of cash flows, and the profit and loss. Even now, when you don't have profits, right? Because every profit and loss is going to show a loss because you don't have revenues. I mean, you might have bank interest, or if you sell tote bags or hold classes or something, you might have money coming in. It's not going to fully cover the amount of money that's going out to pay this general manager, right? But it's important to ask for those statements in that form, so that you get used to reading them. And then also, you know, most pro formas show operating losses for that first couple of years, right? So even after you open, you're going to be reviewing financial reports, and that profit and loss statement for that period, whatever it is that month, is going to show loss. And that's not going to change until you your sales come up and your margins come up and your labor goes down, right? Those are the magic 3 things that you need. And then you also need reporting against the pro forma, right? So you have this pro forma, you have budgets for improvements, equipment, fees, right? So you need to be getting reports against each of those categories individually, so that you can see how that spending is going against that pro forma, right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's probably a dumb question.
No, there's no dumb questions.
So like this reporting, I love this reporting structure, but like who initially sets it up that then gets carried out afterwards? Because I think we struggle with that. Who sets up this initial thing, and then after that is, you know what I mean? Like.
Yeah. So hopefully it is a process that you are engaging in with your general manager.
Right.
You need to be in conversation with them because you need their buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just send them an email and say, we want these 7 things, and I want this on Friday and this on Tuesday morning. They need to understand it, especially if they're coming from a conventional background and they don't have co-op experience, they don't have policy governance experience. They really need to understand why these reports are so important. I mean, they're so vital, right? Because these are your windows, right? This is how you know what's going on, right? So you can, it's never too late.
Right.
You could start reporting next week, but have your general manager come to a meeting, talk about it. Let them give you their opinion on the form of the report. And do you want, maybe they want to do an Excel, great, or whatever it is, allow them to participate in a conversation with you. And then you can start it up. I mean, you're open.
Right.
So you don't need like a project management report, right? That is another report that a startup would be looking for, right? For when was the equipment being ordered, what's the construction timeline, where are we at with permitting? That is also a transition report that goes away. And even these are not normal times for that. I'm sorry, I'm like, we don't know when our refrigerators are coming.
Yeah.
We think we know, but we don't really, because of the crazy pandemic, supply chain disruptions, I think that it has never been harder to actually open a store than it is this year and was last year. And I think it's never been more important, right? I mean, what are we doing in and for our communities, right? Especially what they're not getting from Whole Foods or Stop and Shop or whatever. But I digress. Yeah, so even in like normal times, you really want that construction timeline, equipment timeline snapshot. You want that coming to you monthly as well. I do recommend, I'll say one more thing, I'm sorry about the financial reports. I do recommend asking for a B1. And I recommend asking for that. That's your financial conditions and activities, okay? Even though you're not open, and even though your general manager is going to be answering like not applicable for a lot of that stuff, I recommend starting it just to get used to it, get used to reading it, right? So bring that on, do it quarterly, start tomorrow. So values reports, that could be things like the local farmers, healthy food access if you have a healthy food access program. HR and staffing, super important. You want to know that your general manager is getting ready. So we're looking at, systems and policies and having the employee handbook. And then pre-open marketing. That's another thing that if you have a general manager that comes out of a conventional store, this is something they might have just been given from corporate, right? If there's a corporate or a parent entity, the flyers just miraculously show up at the store, on Saturday morning or something, and then they just put them up, okay? So it's really important, do not let your GM try to take money out of your marketing budget and spend it on something else. You have to have that marketing, okay? Because that's gonna translate into your sales, right? And that's what we need. We need sales in order to meet our pro forma projections, right? We're looking for sales to come in at a certain minimum level, okay? And the pre-open marketing is really crucial to that. All right, so let's see. I think we're almost through the slides, and then we can just answer questions. So, in terms of when they start, how frequently, this is just an example, right? You do you. And do it with your general manager. Like whatever schedule works for you, okay? Is it coming the Friday, the activity report might be coming every Friday. Timeline, monthly, are we doing the first Monday, are we doing the Friday before the board meeting? Like what does that look like, right? And then FYI is whenever needed, right? But have a plan, right? Think it through. And do it as a group of directors, hopefully before your GM shows up, right? So kind of come to consensus amongst yourselves, but then be open to feedback from that general manager. Sam used to send us their activity reports on Friday afternoons. And then finally they called me, they were like, Siobhan, this sucks. Can I do it on a Monday morning? Yes, right? Because that's different. That's different than saying, you're asking for too much, why do you need all this reporting? I don't have time to do reports. Those are red flags, okay? Okay, let's see. Okay, that was my last slide, guys. Questions? Yes, Karen.
So I believe in the hands-off philosophy of the GM having the power to do what he or she needs to do. However, let's say you hire somebody, I'm just using a sample.
Mhm.
You hire somebody that's not familiar with the community. They come in and they're interviewing people and they tell you they're interviewing somebody that you know just got canned from 4 jobs. Do you share that or do you let them go?
Does anybody else want to take a stab at answering that question? Anybody with HR experience in particular? Yes.
You would just ask, like a due diligence question. Oh, have they checked, the background check must have come through okay? The references were good?
You can always ask a question. It's tricky because we are trying to kind of navigate this, and so the policy governance, there's a phrase, it's a very common policy governance phrase, which is nose in and hands out, right? So the goal, one of the goals of policy governance is to keep people in their lanes, is to keep the board from messing around with all that stuff. But as you know, as especially how JQ and Rich talked about it, and hopefully how I talked about it as well. Like, your lane isn't just to sit back and crack a beer and read a report. Like, that's not, like, we do still have this really active responsibility to know what's going on, right? So you don't want to not delegate enough to your general manager. And you don't want to be micromanaging them. But I think that if you have information to share, you absolutely would share it with them.
But it would be their decision rather than
That's
the
what,
babysitter.
so, right, okay, so coming back to how to have a safe conversation. We recognize that you have authority here. That's it, literally, that's how you start. That is how you make a conversation safe. We're coming into this conversation, we recognize that this is your decision, that you have the authority here. And now we're gonna talk about it, because now we've created a space where we can have these conversations, and a space where individual directors even can have opinions, express a concern, right? But yes, sharing information like that, right? But generally speaking, that general manager is in charge of hiring the staff, and hopefully they have at least a part-time HR person, depending on the size of your co-op. It may just be part-time. But yes. And you can always share. You can always send an email to the general manager as long as you CC everybody else on the board. That's what helps keep you out of this place where, like the big smush, like I'm a director and I'm gonna talk to the general manager, I'm gonna give the general manager information. You just have to be really clear. So by CCing the entire rest of the board, now you kind of made it a safer way to communicate. Yeah, all right, yes?
But in the HR world, you would not want to document if you're informing something about why they don't get a job.
This is why I asked, thank you. This is why I asked if there was an HR person in the room.
Of why they didn't get a job.
There's all these rules,
Yep.
and you can't write.
You do not want to write that down.
Don't break any HR rules. And you can pick up the phone, especially if you're the board chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can pick up the phone and talk to your GM.
Yep.
Okay. Yes?
So when you were saying that you would copy the rest of the board on every email, is that true for the board chair as well?
Typically not.
Okay, because I was gonna say that could be a lot of emails.
Yeah, so typically not. So
Okay.
what you'll find is that the chair and the GM have this kind of additional extra layer to their relationship, right? Those are really the two people who are interacting the most, and that's where it's the most important to kind of build this healthy, trusting relationship. Yeah. And then the board chair would be the one to make a decision. Okay, I think I'm gonna send an FYI to the rest of the board with the GM on the email, right? So that my GM doesn't think I'm talking about them behind their back, right? But yeah, no, so that is a place where a director, but just the chair, or whoever it is in your co-op that you're designated, right? And somebody else isn't gonna try to do that again tomorrow or something. It's always gonna be the same person, okay? So yeah, so having conversations, and then, because what do you want there to not be any surprises. You don't want any surprises at a board meeting, right? And so that chair is gonna be the first person to find out if there's something to report, if there's something going on, right? And then the chair also has this responsibility to help prepare the board by doing the agenda and including whatever needs to be included for prep, right? And some of that prep might come directly from your general manager, and some might not, right? So that's just the governance thing that we all, yeah, these are great questions. Yeah.
Wasn't clear on the activity report.
Yeah.
Is that a report you give the general manager like a standard format, or you just give them a blank slate and say, go at it?
I don't think it has to be a particular format. I mean, if it's bullets, if it's in a Word document that's using, the goal is for it to be easy for them to create and easy for you to read and not suck up all of their time doing it and give you what you need to know, right? And that actually probably is the goal for all of these reports, right? So whatever the agreed upon format, and then, so our general manager put together kind of this, like a dashboard for reporting on kind of different multiple things. And then somebody on our board was like, hey, I am red, green, colorblind, and it all just looks gray to me. Could we change? Okay, well, let's change the colors, Kathy.
Is there, where did you get, or maybe you didn't, templates for these various transitional reports that?
So these are being co-created right now by JQ and I for this chapter 3.
Okay.
So, right, there are templates for the B1. There are templates out there for a B1 report. There's not templates out there for any of this other stuff, right? Unfortunately, yes.
Is there I'm curious in the room, but when is the best time of the month to have a board meeting and reporting? Because I had heard that at one point we were doing it at the first of the month, but that was stressful to do it at that time.
Yeah.
So when is a good
Yeah.
time within the month to have that?
So at ASPET we meet twice a month, but only one of those meetings is a business meeting, and that is the meeting that we do. It's our second meeting of the month, so we're always looking for it to be the third week. All right, because what you want to do is you want to give your GM time to close out the month, right? And so that you want to be reasonable, right? Everybody has to be reasonable, right? And so you want to be reasonable in requesting this financial information. You need to give them enough time to close out the month, get all the accounts reconciled, download the profit and loss, download the blah, 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 and put the financial reports together. And so should not be really before the 20th. You really should try to give them 2 or almost 3 weeks to do that. But you don't want to wait forever, right? You don't want to be getting a financial report from April. You don't want to be getting it at the end of May, and it turns out there's something going on, because now you pretty much not only was something going on in April, now you've gone a whole other month of maybe something going on in May as well. So again, it's this balance between what's reasonable to ask of the GM, and how do you get your needs met to know what's happening in your co-op, right? Yeah. And then that's our business meeting, and we review financial reports, we review our project timeline reports, we do kind of all that kind of stuff. And just putting it out there, our other meeting of the month is purposefully not formally structured with an agenda. We call those working meetings. And we might have 1 or 2 things that we talk about. And it gives us an opportunity to just have more space for whatever conversation. So that's more like a strategic planning time. It can be. We redid our logo. We allowed our GM to redo our logo. That's another thing maybe you should think about. Like, what if your GM wants to do your logo? Like, are you going to let them? But we did it as a closely partnered process where we gave them the authority to make the final logo decision, partly because I was worried that my board would not come to consensus. But we did it as a collaborative process together. And so we did it during these, we call them the first of the month meetings. Yeah. Does somebody else? Yes, you have.
So you were saying that the board, if a director emailed the GM, then they should, CC the board.
With a question.
Okay, because it gets me a little concerned. We've had, 2 contractors, and we've got a lot of people emailing them. And now all of a sudden they have like 5 bosses. What is the communication?
So that would be an opportunity for the board chair to take action in that moment. If there are too many emails, it is too distracting and it runs the risk. You don't want your GM to feel like they have 5 bosses or 7 bosses or 9 bosses. Your GM needs to feel like they have a boss, right? And so that's really, it's so hard to know, right? Like, it's so hard to know what you guys are going to experience because of who your board members are and because of who your general manager is. Like, it's just hard to know. But that would be an opportunity for the board chair to come in and say, hey, I want to do it differently. People can email me their questions and maybe I'll do like a once a week. Or we'll do it just at a board meeting. Because that is also an appropriate time for directors to be asking questions, right? And then somebody asked me about who has the most trouble with this. Was that you? Mm-hmm. Directors who don't want to let go. Does that shock you? Are you surprised that that's my answer? This is my baby, right? I started organizing. I went to my first meeting in March of 2012. I've been doing this a long time.
That's a baby.
Teenager. Yeah. And I let go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes individual directors have a hard time. And that's also an appropriate place, unless it's the board chair. That's a whole other level of fun. If it's the board chair who doesn't want to let go, we could do a whole other workshop on that, just on that. But that's an opportunity for that board chair to have. And you can always meet as a board without your general manager. There are totally valid reasons why you would do that. And so it's actually good to normalize that. You don't do it every week, right? But it's actually really important to normalize that because you don't want them to panic. You don't want them to be like, oh my God, what are they doing? Are they going to fire me? What's going on? You don't want them to panic, right? So there's lots of reasons why you would meet in a board-only space. Dealing with a director who's not following your guidelines or your stated norms of behavior would be one of those reasons. And you're allowed to do that without, 5 minutes, thank you. You're allowed to do that without your GM. And it makes it easier, right? So, yes.
I'll just phrase this as a general and kind of yes or no question because I feel like it could be a rabbit hole. But a lot of what you talked about today and a lot about what I've just been ruminating on is all related to these reports that kind of bump up against policy governance and are specifically like the success of the co-op is the success of your GM or vice versa, right? But what I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around a little bit is what about the things that are, I'll call them individual development opportunities for the person who is the GM? Mm-hmm. And is that more of a personnel committee working with the GM to identify opportunities and development, or is it the board chair?
I mean, it could be. It could be. It really depends on your co-op. It could be your hiring committee. you keep your hiring committee and you turn them into your GM professional development committee. Right? I mean, it's like, it's so hard to answer that question because there are startups, we'll just say it, there are startups who struggle with committees. Also not a surprise, right? So you might not have 10 different committees. So it may be the executive committee, it may be a subset of your board that, again, is just willing to put in that additional time commitment to do that work. That's really what it's about. Who has the capacity to spend that extra amount of time?
I just feel like it's really important to make sure that the GM feels supported in their own development
Absolutely.
as well and all of that. And I feel like that's not
Absolutely.
really, we haven't really captured that in all the other things we've focused on with the GM, so I
That's
kinda
why
wanna-
having like a GM development plan, and if you don't have, if you have a GM and you don't have a development plan, it's okay.
Just start one, yeah.
Create one now. Talk about it with your general manager. Get their buy-in, you know? You can always just start, nothing, you know? You can just do better, yes.
What strategy do you suggest for succession planning with the GM? I've read like case studies where people had stores and then when they lost their GM, their store kind of went haywire. Like, do you have any strategies to
Yes.
work with that?
That is an excellent question. I don't have a great answer. I mean, if our GM left, we'd be screwed. I mean, I don't have a great answer, you know. I agree that there should be succession planning, and there actually is a policy. If you have a policy register, you have a policy, your GM linkage policies, you have a policy that says that your GM cannot fail to have at least one manager able to step in and do their job. You know, whether that, in an absence, whether that absence is planned or unplanned or permanent, you would have a policy like that. So that could be a whole session unto itself. Like, that's
Put in the policy into practice. I know sometimes we have all these policies, handbooks and everything, but they're not in practice.
Yeah, that's true for a lot of policies. Not just
Yeah, we have policies for that, but
policies.
it's
Board of Directors guidelines, sometimes those aren't always,
People have never read them.
people slip on those too. Yes, and I think this is going to be interesting.
I'll add on to that concern is
Yeah.
that having policies and procedures, so they're
Yes.
two very
Yes.
distinct things.
Yeah.
And having a really good set of technical documentation, so
Yeah.
if that person leaves
Yeah.
and you don't have that
Yeah.
redundancy, at least you have it in writing.
So there are members of our board, not the entire board, but there are members of our board who have access to all of our GM stuff. We don't go in there, right? That would not be appropriate for me to just go in and start rummaging around in all of their stuff. But we have a way to get in, should something unplanned happen. So, passwords, somebody needs to, maybe that's the board chair, the executive committee, right? Somebody who's not just board chair. These are all excellent things. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Hey.